We've seen the violent protests on university campuses all across the United States, mostly on Ivy League campuses. Now, the New York police actually went in and cleared out some of those issues at Columbia University. We now see scuffles happening on the campuses of UCLA. Well, we only knew it was a matter of time before these protests manifested themselves here in Canada.
Disclose! Divest! We will not stop! We will not rest!
And that's exactly what's happening. Hello, I'm Adrienne Batra. With me are Brian Lilley and Lorrie Goldstein. Lorrie, it was really only a matter of time. We saw the ongoing issues in the United States. I think that the law enforcement has gone in methodically, reasonably. There have been arrests, but it hasn't gone completely sideways. Everyone understands the right to peacefully protest, but at some point, these students down in the United States, with interfering actors, according to law enforcement, they took over buildings, they started destruction, they started burning, they started breaking everything, and then they were occupying buildings. McGill has had issues. Now, University of Toronto has a tent city, shall we say, set up. University of Ottawa. So, save for this turning violent, how long are these going to last?
I think it depends on how these things play out. It depends on what the instructions are to the police in terms of how they should, how they should handle these things. Look, I don't have a problem with, obviously, with young university students or anyone else protesting. Although I don't think people who aren't part of the university should be protesting on the grounds of the university, but because there are agitators who come in. But look, passions about what's happening in Gaza are it's understandable. It's thrown Ukraine right off the map. But the concern I have is the context for how this is happening. This was preceded both in Canada and the United States by increasingly, anti-Semitic is a confusing term, by increasing Jew hatred in demonstration after demonstration of Jewish university students saying they feared for their safety, of students staying home because they feared for their safety and sought to complete their years online. And so that's the context. Normally, I believe in freedom of assembly and speech, including for, causes I disagree with. I didn't have a problem with Occupy Wall Street to a large extent until it turned into violence, intimidation, the expression of hatred. And I cannot, and I understand the universities are reacting now, but in my view, I'm using Canada as an example, they let this happen. This isn't happening in isolation. Year after year after year, there was this kind of rhetoric being expounded on campuses by campus groups, and the universities did nothing. And I don't know if that's because they were cowards or because they secretly agreed with it. Because as we know, many people in academia, particularly in the liberal arts, are, believe that Israel is, breaking international law, which is true, and all those things, but then they go beyond that. And so it doesn't surprise me. I think we're in for a long haul on this stuff. I hope nobody gets hurt. And I don't mind the demonstrations, but I understand why, no public institution can have this stuff going on day after day, where basically their entire campus is hijacked.
Well, Brian, University of Toronto, for example, tried to get ahead of this. They put up some barricades, but they also made very clear, look, this is private property. You cannot stay here. Now that these have sprouted up like mushrooms, the tents, this is going to be a problem to dismantle it. And as there's going to be deeper roots that they establish. Until things like, and I hope it doesn't happen here, but we saw things change when things went violent on the campuses in the United States. But this is, this is Canada. We handle things a lot differently, shall we say. I'm wondering from your perspective, as people see this going on, Yes, it's a nuisance. Yes, it's annoying. Yes, it's interfering. Canceled classes, canceled graduations, all this stuff. What do you think the public perception is of this?
Well, as you could hear there, my dog is not a fan of these protests, does not like them at all, very upset by them. But there was a poll out from Angus Reid this week showing that Canadians in general are approving of protests on universities. Maybe lots of them have fond memories of, protesting on university campuses. But I fundamentally disagree with what's going on here. I'll take a different tack than Lorrie. These people are camping out. They are setting up permanent encampments. They are intimidating locals. They are harassing people. They are spreading hateful language. When that happened on Wellington Street in Ottawa, outside of the Prime Minister's office and across from Parliament Hill, progressives who are now defending this were apoplectic, that it had to stop, it had to end. In Montreal, we've seen where this eventually turns. I'm sure that, the people going up and down St. Catherine Street, smashing windows, were not students. I used to work in Montreal, covered riots there. They'll riot because it's Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, doesn't matter. They just like a good riot, but it's turning violent. The rhetoric on campus is unbelievable. It has to be called out. And as I said, when the truckers were on Wellington Street in Ottawa, you can show up and protest every single day. Protest all you want, but you do not have the right to live on a public street. You do not have the right to live on a university campus in a tent in the Commons, which is what they're trying to do.
Brian brings up the poll, Lorrie, that the Canadians' views towards the protests on campus. It is certainly, they support that. It's one of our fundamental rights. But where the numbers change and the perspective changes is when things go violent, which is what we've seen turn around the perspective in the United States. When the New York law enforcement went in on Columbia campus to take apart what was going on there, it was because they had intelligence saying that there were outside actors that were the almost professional agitators coming from all over the place. We could probably guess what groups they are, but they weren't named. But that said, that is the concern about what could happen in Canada as well. We saw it with G20. We saw it back in 2010 when what unfolded on the streets of Toronto. It has a similar feel to it. I hope it doesn't get there. Allow these students to protest peacefully, even though half of them don't know what the hell they're there for. They probably saw some 5-minute TikTok video and they think, "Oh, I'm here for this." So I'm wondering, it sounds like this is just the beginning, so the summer of protest.
Yeah, it's interesting about polls. Just by chance, a major Harvard-Harris poll came out in the States recently, and it was omnibus poll, all kinds of things, showed considerable support for Israel in the conflict. But at one point, they did a very interesting thing that I think more pollsters should do. Right in their poll, they put a warning: beware of fake questions in polls. And the way they illustrated it was they asked people first, do you think there should be a ceasefire in the Israel-Hamas war? 70% agreed, 30% disagreed. Then they asked, do you think there should be a ceasefire in Gaza without Hamas having to release the hostages and with Hamas remaining in charge? 68% opposed, 32% in favor. So these questions, I think we're much wiser to go with the experience of people like yourself and Brian, who have seen, and myself, we've seen this stuff before. We've seen it play out. At the very start of the conflict on October 7th, within a couple of days, I wrote that the world will be sympathetic to Israel for some time. And then, based on what I know Israel is going to do, based on past experience of dealing with Hamas and the enormity of this attack, the worst one-day massacre of Jews since the Holocaust, I know what they're going to have to do, and the world is going to turn against them. And you didn't need a poll for that.
Yeah. Brian, final thoughts and a quick word from you on this. We've seen some of the campus students in the U.S. saying that they need to have food and water supplied to them, and then the reporters are pushing back and saying, "Well,
Communism doesn't work.
Shocking. Communism doesn't work. But there's been no indication that they haven't been able to have their supply lines refueled. And then you see these videos of people secretly handing them food from, this clandestine part of the fence. Like, it's just all bizarre and it's all performative, and it doesn't really stand for much. But what it does say to me is there's a very disturbing trend amongst a certain sect of our population, particularly these young ones. They're very anti-democratic. They're very anti-American and anti-Canadian in terms of what our values are and what we stand for. This has manifested itself before on university campuses, where they look at themselves as the place where that sort of thing, that civil unrest should happen. But this is a very different time. What we're seeing is over-the-top rhetoric coming from these groups, circling Jewish students, not allowing them to get onto campus, circling people who disagree with them, and it is fundamentally problematic to who we are as Canadians.
The young woman that you saw asking for humanitarian aid to be sent into Hamilton Hall at Columbia, looked her up. She is an instructor in Marxist poetry interpretation. The professor from Columbia that CBC had on in the middle of the takedown, talking about how this is awful and it shouldn't happen. He was a Marxist professor in English literature. These people, there's a lot of these Marxists who are useful idiots for the people who are behind the protests. They may be the face of it, asking for humanitarian aid, but they're just the useful idiots. Warren Kinsella had a column detailing a number of things, including a study showing that millions of dollars have gone to campus clubs and organizations across North America from Hamas-linked charities over the past several years. That is what is happening here. That you don't just suddenly show up with professional signs and more Palestinian flags than we knew were in the country at a rally, and show up week after week like this. In some of these people going from city to city, somebody's paying for all of this. And the people that we're seeing on campuses are often just the useful idiots. They're the tools being used by people and organizations with a much more sinister motive behind it.
Well, let us know what you think in the comments below. Like this video and subscribe to our YouTube channel, and go to thetorontosun.com. You'll find commentary and coverage there you will not find anywhere else.